Hello and welcome. Today we're going to tackle one of the questions we hear all the time in nonprofit compliance. How long does multi-state charitable solicitation registration actually take?
This explainer is brought to you by Ironwood Registrations. They're specialists who help nonprofits navigate the, let's be honest, pretty complex world of fundraising compliance.
And this is part of our multi-state fundraising compliance series, where our whole goal is to explain these really important regulatory topics in practical, clear terms for you and your team. So, let's get right into it. If you're planning to fundraise across state lines, I'm willing to bet one of your first questions is, just how long is this whole registration process going to take? It's such a critical question for planning your campaigns and, of course, managing your resources. In this explainer, we're going to break that down. We'll talk about the typical timeline, and just as important, the key things that can either speed the process up or, slow it way down. All right, let's start with our first section, state-level processing. The most important thing to get your head around is that every state is on its own schedule. This is not one big, unified process. It's handled state by state. And that's really the crucial point. There's no single federal agency for this. Every state has its own system, its own forms, and its own review timeline, which means the answer to how long is never just one number. It's always a range. And there are a bunch of variables at play within each state. The agency's workload can create a backlog, an incomplete application will always slow you down, plus some states are just more thorough than others, and they might come back and ask for more information. So, with all those variables, what can you realistically expect? Let's talk about some typical time ranges. For most states, once you've submitted a complete application, you're generally looking at a processing time of several weeks to a few months. Some states are faster, for sure, but this is a pretty safe window to keep in mind for your planning.
And this brings up a key reality of any multi-state project. If you're registering in 10 states, your project isn't really done until that 10th and slowest state gives you the green light. That's the real timeline you have to plan for.
Okay, so before any clock starts ticking on the state's end, there's the prep stage. This is the part that you and your organization have direct control over.
Almost every state is going to ask for a core set of documents. You'll pretty much always need your IRS determination letter confirming you're a 501c3, your articles of incorporation, a current list of your officers and directors, and your most recent IRS Form 990.
Having all these documents organized and ready to go before you even start filling out forms is one of the best things you can do to streamline the whole process and avoid those simple, unforced delays.
And that brings us to a really common hurdle in the prep stage: financial reporting rules. Honestly, this is a very common reason for potential delays.
See, a lot of states have thresholds based on your annual contributions. If you're below a certain amount, your Form 990 is usually enough. But if your revenue goes above that threshold, the state might require reviewed or even fully audited financial statements prepared by an independent CPA.
And this is a huge planning point. If you don't already have those audited financials on hand, getting them prepared can take weeks, sometimes even months. That time has to be factored into your timeline long before you ever plan to submit anything.
So, knowing all of this, how do you approach a multi-state registration project strategically? It really all comes down to proactive planning.
Here's a simple but really powerful checklist. First, know exactly which states you need to register in. Then, get a jump on those financial documents, especially if you think an audit might be needed. Always try to file well before a big fundraising campaign kicks off, and just build in a generous buffer for the state to do its review. Finally, let's talk about why this focus on timing is so critical, because it isn't just about good planning, it's about legal compliance.
The rule is simple, and it is absolute. You have to be registered in a state before you start asking for donations from its residents. Fundraising first and trying to register later is non-compliant, and it can lead to penalties. Think of it this way. Registration is the legal prerequisite. It's the ticket you need to have in your hand before the show can even begin. It is not an optional step or something you can just catch up on later. So, to sum it all up, while you can't control how fast a state agency works, you can absolutely control your own preparation. By getting your documents in order and planning ahead, you can manage the timeline way more effectively.
And really, this proactive approach is what allows your organization to grow its fundraising footprint with confidence, making sure that your compliance keeps pace with your expanding mission.
So we'll leave you with this final thought to consider. When you look at your organization's goals for this next year, is your fundraising plan fully aligned with a realistic compliance timeline? Thanks for watching.